Good afternoon, friends and newcomers, to our Friday special conversations with special people. I'm so happy to have as our guest today Matthew Hale, professor and program chair for the Department of Political Science and Public Affairs at Seton Hall University. Matthew, you're a very busy man, and I appreciate this so much. You are also a media commentator on New Jersey politics and on local news programs like On the Record and Power and Politics on News 12. And you also write a regular column called So What About This? I can't wait to read that column. It just is so intriguing. So What About This? For the political website InsideNewJersey.com. And years ago, you were an aide to California Senator Barbara Boxer, who was wonderful. So with all that, this is how I always tell people how I reach them. Usually they come into the library, but your name was in a Star Ledger article that I was reading, and it said you went to Seton Hall. And so I called, and it's not easy to get through to people anymore. I do it the old fashioned way, not, emailing. I called, and you called me back, and you're wonderful. And I told you about our program, and the people are so terrific. They really appreciate learning. And sometimes professors have said they wish their students were like this group. But and their students are paying a lot more money to not pay attention. But in any case,
well, thank you.
I really appreciate your coming, and I just wanted to tell you that the topic you chose, the politics after Trump, the next New Jersey elections, sounds so intriguing. I can't wait to hear it. So please, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you, Matthew Hale. Thank you so much for coming. And now.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to, Phyllis has been fantastic in making sure I've got everything I need and making sure that I'm going to show up and making sure that all of those things. So I really appreciate her, and it looks like there's a great group. My son is a sophomore at Columbia High School, so then obviously I've been at South Orange for quite some time, and raided the library there with all my kids. So thank you very much to everybody for coming tonight, or this afternoon, I guess. So one of the things that is intriguing to me about New Jersey is we are really kind of an oddball in some respects, in that our legislative and our gubernatorial elections come at an odd year. They come after the presidential election. So we've always done it that way. I don't really know why we've done it that way, but one of the exciting things, or one of the interesting things about having elections in 2021, right after a big tumultuous election in 2020, is that we really are kind of a bellwether for how the current president is doing. So one of the first tests that people look at is whether or not the party of the president wins in New Jersey and Virginia afterwards. And so I think that's kind of an interesting overview about our 2020 elections. But I did make up a couple PowerPoint slides that I thought maybe I'd work off of, just so that we can see a couple things. And I'm going to go and share my screen. And if this doesn't work,
you know that a lot of people are not on computer, right?
I do. I've learned that, but we'll put it up for people who are, and I'll make sure that people who aren't, I'll describe what they could be seeing, if that's okay. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to show, can everybody see that? Who can see? Okay. So the first thing I wanted to show is how New Jersey has been changing over the years. So if you look at, this is a map of New Jersey, and it's broken down by congressional districts. If you look at 2014, we were actually had the majority of our congressional districts, or the majority it was about half and half, were Republican and Democrat. And you can see that by the red part and the blue part. In 2016, we gathered up, the Democrats gathered up a couple more seats. In 2018, it was actually a landslide. Democrats took all but one congressional district in New Jersey. Now, I didn't put up 2020, but if you look at this far right slide that says 2018, it's a state of New Jersey picture, and it's all blue except for one. In 2020, it's actually would have two blues because there's a district down south that was Democrat and now turned Republican. And so I think it's interesting to note that just in the last less than 10 years, New Jersey has gone from a state that was split evenly between Republicans and Democrats to a state that is almost entirely made up of Democrats. And I think that has some interesting ramifications and means a couple of different things. So we'll talk about those. So just to let you know, I wanted to show this as well. This is a quick, I don't know if I'm going to go into too much detail here, but this was in 2020, which was last year. And basically what it shows, again, in congressional districts is there was very little districts where there was actually competition. So if you look at the districts that were all Democrat in 2020, they 90% of the vote was cast to a Democrat, right? Or in the Republican district, in the Republican primaries, it was 90% of the Republican primaries. And so there's not a lot of districts that are competitive between Republicans and Democrats. There are a couple though, and so I wanted to point those out. So the two that are the two areas that are competitive. It's really probably one area when you think about it. One is the 7th congressional district, which is very close to South Orange. South Orange is not in the 7th, but it's your neighbor. And perhaps parts of it might be in the 7th district. That's how close it is. But in 2020, Tom Malinowski ran against Thomas Kane Jr. You may remember his dad was a governor at one point. But Malinowski won by just over 5,000 votes out of almost 400,000 cast. So it was a very, very close race. And that's right in the middle of the state. It's right around Westfield is where that congressional district is. And it's a very close district, meaning it could go either way. The other one that is close is down south. It's down in Atlantic City. And that's the one that I was talking about where Jeff Van Drew, who used to be a Democrat, but became a Republican, beat a Kennedy, Amy Kennedy. He won by about 20,000 votes at about 375,000 cast. That district is still pretty close. So when you think about overall in New Jersey, I think the biggest thing to think about is that there aren't a lot of places in New Jersey where the elections are very competitive. You tend to have places where the Democrats are always going to win and some places where the Republicans are always going to win. And we'll see that when we talk a little bit more about the Assembly or the Senate areas as well. But I think that's an important thing to recognize about New Jersey is that there's not a huge number of places in New Jersey where you have competition between the parties. So, okay, so with that backdrop, let's go on to look at the race for the 2020 gubernatorial race. So as you all know, our current governor is Phil Murphy. And, one of the things that Phyllis let you know is that sometimes I'm a pundit on TV, and I'm going to bet that the person that is running against him on the Republican side is a man named Jack Ciattarelli. And so here's a couple things to think about in terms of this race. So what I tried to do is I tried to put some positives for both of the candidates. And I'm not doing this because I'm supporting, that you can be, I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other. I think both of them have positive things. And if they play up these things, I think that they could do well. So let's start with Phil Murphy. So one of the things that is a positive for Phil Murphy running for governor this time is that he is an incumbent. there is always an advantage in every race to the person who has the office. Unless that person has done something really, really bad, they're generally have an advantage just because they're the ones already in it. They're the ones already in the office. So that's an advantage for him. I would argue that the second thing and the third thing and the fourth thing that are important about the second and third and fourth thing that are important for Phil Murphy has been his COVID response. And we were talking earlier about getting vaccines before we started. And I think there's a lot of people who are struggling a little bit with getting the vaccines. It's not exactly an easy process. There's a computer process involved. If you're not particularly computer literate, that's a problem. And the other thing that could be an issue is that at the very beginning of the pandemic, Governor Murphy made some decisions about what to do with nursing homes that may not turned out to have been the right decisions. But I say this with a broader understanding that I would argue that overall, compared to many people, many other leaders around the country, that the response of Governor Murphy to COVID is better than most. And I think that from a couple different perspectives, he has appeared to be a competent, perhaps a little bit boring, but a regular force about talking about COVID, and sort of someone who has made sure that that things as best that they can are working, and that he is talking about following science as best that he can. And so when you look at polling about who has done well in a COVID response, Phil Murphy actually comes up fairly high. Phil Murphy generally, not just in New Jersey, but the way that he has responded overall, I think has been quite positive. Now, that being said, the election is not till November, so we have a long, long way to go. But the things that will happen between now and then are how the vaccine rollout continues, whether or not the businesses are able to open up and open up faster. You know, that restaurants are going to be able to be at 50% capacity this weekend. And then most importantly, whether or not schools are going to open. If all of those things happen in the next several months, like the next 3 months, if the schools are open, if people are able to get back to businesses, if New Jersey is able to lead in terms of the number of people getting vaccines, we have a higher percentage than most states right now of people getting the vaccine. If all of those things happen, schools open, businesses open, and the vaccine rollout continues at its pace, I'm pretty convinced that no one is going to beat Phil Murphy. Because the only thing that I think matters to people most, and this isn't universal, but most people about this election is going to be, did Phil Murphy do a good job or a bad job about COVID? So all of those things, if in the next 3 months, the business is open, the schools open, and people are starting to get more and more vaccines, I think that Phil Murphy is going to be very, very difficult to beat. Not just because of how he responded, but remember, going back to our first map, New Jersey's pretty Democratic. So it takes a lot for a Democrat to lose, okay? The other thing that I put down here that I thought might be a factor for Phil Murphy is the relationship with Joe Biden and the Biden White House. If Joe Biden is seen as a disaster, it will hurt Phil Murphy. If Joe Biden is seen as boring and competent and again doing COVID-19, then Phil Murphy will reap the benefits of that. So they are sort of tied together because they're of the same party. And so there is that sort of other factor, that the extent to which the Biden administration is seen as handling things positively, that will help Phil Murphy. So Then I looked over at Jack Ciattarelli, and the important thing about Jack Ciattarelli is he's a former state assemblyman. He ran for governor last time around, and he lost to Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno in the Republican primary. But he did very, very well. So he is charismatic, he is likable, he is smart, and he is young. I don't know exactly how young he is, but he has all of those characteristics. He is, you know, you've probably heard people say before that he's the kind of guy you want to have a beer with. So he has all of those characteristics. I'm going to make an argument that the most important thing that he has to do in order to be a competitor here is anytime that Phil Murphy makes a mistake, Jack Ciattarelli has to pounce on it. So if you're reading the news, if you're seeing what's going on, if there are things that Murphy is not getting right, that's the only thing that Jack Ciattarelli is going to talk about. He's going to talk about how Murphy blew this, or Murphy didn't do that, or Murphy could have done better this. So the real focus of what he will need to do, and what I think he will do, is talk about and play up as many mistakes as he possibly can about Phil Murphy. Again, back to my point is that if Phil Murphy handles all of these COVID-related 19 things well, I don't think it really matters what Jack Ciattarelli does. He's going to lose. But I think that he has an opportunity if there is a mistake, or if he can convince people that there's been mistakes, then I think he does have an opportunity. The other thing that Jack Ciattarelli has going for him is that he's not Donald Trump. So poll after poll after poll shows that the vast majority of people, Republicans and Democrats alike in New Jersey, do not like Donald Trump. He has some of the lowest poll numbers in the country for Donald Trump are in New Jersey. Vermont hates him more, but we're close. So I think that's and Jack Ciattarelli is not Donald Trump. He's not anywhere close to being associated with Donald Trump. He's also not Chris Christie. And I'll make an argument that Chris Christie's political career is not over. Chris Christie is positioning himself to run for president, and I think he really will do that. But Jack Ciattarelli is also not Chris Christie, so he's independent of that. Those are factors that I think could play in to his benefit. That he's not either one of those Republicans that are very, very unpopular. One of the reasons why Kim Guadagno in the last gubernatorial election lost so badly is that she was associated with Chris Christie. She was his lieutenant governor, and so that hurt her tremendously. Jack Ciattarelli doesn't have that sort of baggage. Okay, so those are the positives that I think for each of the candidates. Now, here's some negatives, or here's some dangers for each of the candidates that you should be looking out for as the election comes about. You'll notice that the negatives I put for Phil Murphy are exactly the same as the positives. And that's because, to my mind, all of the potential for Phil Murphy to win this election are all based on how well he does on these things. And so if he gets them wrong, if they blow up, if the schools don't open, if the business climate tanks, if we start getting more and more COVID and it starts going the other way, I think he could be in trouble, because I think people are willing to give him credit for so far, but if it gets bad, he's going to pay the price. So that's a potential negative for him. For Jack Ciattarelli, he doesn't have money. He is only a former state assemblyman, which isn't very, not a lot of people know him. The Republican Party apparatus in New Jersey is not as strong as the Democrats. And so he does struggle with that, especially since there are the few people in New Jersey who support Trump are often part of Republican Party machinery. And that's creates a tension for him to do. I also put not much to say and not much to do. That's not about Jack Ciattarelli. It's really that his response or his campaign is all going to be focused around what Murphy did or didn't do, or what happened with COVID or didn't happen with COVID. And so it's a little bit more difficult for him to have to react to that situation than to come up with his own message. And he will be hard pressed to break through anything other than what is the response to COVID. So I think that's tough for any candidate to do. So I think that could be one of the tough things for him. Okay, so we also have state Senate and state assembly. I'm going to just change this because I forgot to. We have the state Senate and the assembly. So the 80 people of the assembly and the 40 people of the state Senate are all up for re-election in 2021. So before we talk about that specifically, I wanted to just sort of outline where we are right now. In the New Jersey State Senate, there are 25 Democrats and there are 14 Republicans. The leader of the state Senate is Steve Sweeney. In the assembly, there are 52 Democrats and 28 Republicans, and the leader is Craig Coughlin. So why are those numbers important? Because those are enormous margins. The number of Democrats so much outweighs the number of Republicans that in order for Republicans to take back either the state assembly or the state Senate would literally have to be a tectonic shift in New Jersey politics. And that just doesn't happen. There is just, I'll show you something in a minute that sort of, let me see if I can pull that other thing up. 1 second. Okay. So this is from a website called Ballotopia, which I think is an interesting website that shows elections throughout the country. So I'm just going to show you the assembly version of this. So this is the New Jersey General Assembly. And for those of you who don't have phones, what I'm doing is showing a chart of all of the people who are going to run for election so far on the assembly side of things for all of the districts in New Jersey. So at the top, it says Democrat and it says Republican.
I don't think we can see the, we can't see that.
Oh, you can't? Okay. My apologies. Let's try this again.
Yeah, I inhaled something.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. Thank you. Okay, so if you look at the top of this, so this is the General Assembly. So if you look at the, this is the Republican column, and then there's a Democratic column. Notice how many districts don't even put up somebody on the other side. So in District 1, it's a Republican district. Democrats don't even bother to run. District 2, that's the one with Jeff Van Drew is in it. It's that neighborhood, and they do have people running against it. So that's a competitive. But then we go down this whole thing. Look at all of the empty spots on these districts where you don't even have the other side fielding a challenger. So this is a blank spot here. These are people running, which means that whoever wins the primary for a Democrat or Republican are the people who are going to win the election, because there's not enough Republicans in some districts or not enough Democrats to actually make them competitive. This is your district right here, the 27. So there is literally almost no competition between Republicans and Democrats in this election. So there are very few seats where this actually shows itself up. So, so that being said, let me go back to this real quick. There are a couple things that are interesting on the state Senate and the state assembly side. In the state Senate, in the 16th district, a current assemblyman named Andrew Zwicker is running against Dick Zimmer, who has run statewide offices before. This is for a retirement. So there's nobody in the seat right now. That's actually could be a competitive election. The 16th district has tended towards Democrats, but it's not as much as it has in the past. The other ones that are interesting are on the assembly side. The 37th district, the Democrats have a very, very competitive primary between Valerie Huddle and Gordon Johnson. That will be something to watch. Whoever wins that primary will be the assembly person in the 37th. And in the 39th, the Republicans are fighting. But again, remember, whoever wins these primaries are going to win the regular election. I wanted to end and just talk a little bit about your district, which is the 27th, which is a safe Democratic district. But I do wanted to point out that there is an interesting candidate in the Republican side, the man named John Sim, S-Y-M. He is a naval, a career Navy officer who has retired and lives in Milburn. And the reason why it's interesting to me is that one of the things that Democrats have done in order to try and be competitive around the country in districts with Republicans is to run people who have military careers. So for example, Tammy Duckworth in Illinois is a military veteran who ran for Senate. In New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill is a naval pilot and she ran for Congress. So this is an instance at a local level, at a small level, of Republicans looking to veterans as a potential for winning a seat. I think it's a long shot given how Democrat leaning the 27th district is. But it is interesting to see someone like John taking a crack at it. So, okay, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to go with questions. I'm happy to hear your thoughts. I just realized a second ago that my battery seems to have been a lot lower than I thought it was. So if I get a very scary message and all of a sudden disappear, you'll know why. So I just wanted to let you know that. But we'll get right to questions because I think I have enough time left on the battery. So,
well, I just want to say, Matt, you were fabulous. And boy, you gave us such an understanding that most people, well, I wasn't aware of all of this. And because when I go to vote, it's what you said. I go straight down the line. And
yeah,
it's very interesting that there's a challenge anywhere.
Right.
And
okay.
I
see a hand from Tonya.
Tonya, yes.
Tonya, did I say that right?
Tonya.
Okay.
Tonya Moore.
All right. I just want to know if you would comment on Steve Sweeney's position on that list of yours. What's his impact?
Well, Steve Sweeney is president of the state Senate. And he is the second most powerful politician in the state of New Jersey. The southern part of New Jersey it votes together almost all the time as a block, and he's the one who carries those votes. So he is incredibly powerful. He is an incredibly good politician. One of the reasons why I think he's such a good politician is during COVID, he got out of the way. During COVID, before COVID, Steve Sweeney and Phil Murphy were having daily fights with each other. As soon as COVID started, Steve Sweeney stepped aside and said, "Gov, what can I do?" And that's a good politician, because there's in the midst of a crisis, democracy and sharing and transparency probably isn't what people want. They want a leader to take in charge, and that's what Murphy did, and Sweeney led him. So he's a very powerful politician.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Well, yes. I'm just wondering how much of the sway to totally democratic is Trump responsible for?
So I would argue it's a two punch combination. Chris Christie was the most popular Republican in the world at one point and became the most unpopular Republican in the world shortly afterwards. And so the Republican Party has been struggling to recover from that. So before Trump, there was the Christie damaged the Republican Party significantly in New Jersey. Trump, on top of that, did a double damage. One of the things about, in general, Republicans in New Jersey is that they are not super conservative. They tend to be the moderate wing of the Republican Party. And so you will often saw Republicans in New Jersey who would be against any sort of tax increase and in favor of every single tax cut, but be pro-choice. That's generally the Republicans in New Jersey. That's not Trump, so he bears a big, huge responsibility for that, but I think Christie does as well. Abraham.
Thank you, Professor. Along with COVID, I think our communities have struggled with questions of race. And I want to know how you feel government and healing this have gone along.
Absolutely. So I believe that the death of George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd was a fundamental watershed moment in American society. The way that we viewed the videotape of his death was very different than the way that any video ever of any other, police violence ever came across, because he just sat there. There was no struggle. Quick answer to the last one is that I think that it's that the George Floyd fundamentally changed the way that we look at race and politics in America irrevocably. And I think that we have a long way to go and we'll continue to work on it. But I think that is a defining moment in how we address issues of race. So that's my 2 cents on that. Were there other questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about ranked choice voting. Have we adopted it like New York has? And what impact is it likely to have on the next election?
Great question. So no, we have not adopted it. But we are moving in that direction. So one of the things that one of the reasons why New Jersey has so many safe districts for Democrats and Republicans is that the party apparatus in New Jersey is very strong. So the Democratic Party as an organization is strong, and the Republican is less strong, but it's still a pretty strong one. And in general, the way that candidates are picked are that they are given what's called the party line, which means that if you want to run as a Democrat in the 27th district, you have to get the 27th district Democratic Party to give you the nomination.
Right.
Right. So ranked choice voting is one attempt to allow people to pick not just the candidate that the party picks,
right,
to pick a broader spectrum and broader array of candidates. So there's a lot of movement towards it. I've written several times about the idea of moving to ranked choice voting. I will say that one of the biggest difficulties to that happening is the strength of the parties in the state, because this doesn't necessarily fit with the party interests, because you have a broader array of candidates who may or may not be loyal to what the political parties want. So we have a more difficult road to hoe to get to ranked choice voting than other places because we have a operating and functioning and strong party system. I will say that the research on ranked choice voting indicates that when it happens, it sort of seems to be interesting that you can get one of two outcomes. One outcome is that that the electorate becomes more polarized, meaning that the candidates that get through a ranked choice voting process are farther to the left or farther to the right. But that seems to settle over time. And the ranked choice voting that ends up happening, and the biggest example is in Australia, where this has happened for many, many years, is that over time, what ends up happening is that it is more moderate candidates who can gather broader coalitions,
Right.
that end up getting moved forward. So there is movement towards this. There's lawsuits about getting rid of the party line in New Jersey. And I would say that's where we're trending. It won't happen by 2021. My guess is it won't happen by 2024, but I would think maybe by 2028, there could be something along those lines.
Thank you.
If no one is asking a question, I wanted to ask you about the marijuana bill. That I thought it was settled, and it's not settled, right?
Correct. So, so last year voters overwhelmingly supported adult use marijuana. And it was not even close. It was a landslide victory. But one of the reasons it was a landslide victory is that it was a yes or no question. Do you support this or not? When you are going to implement this, you get a very, it's much more complicated and much more difficult. And here's a couple different examples. One of the things that Phil Murphy and others argued, that if you're going to make marijuana legal, then you need to, all of the people who have marijuana arrests in their past should have it expunged. Because if now it's a legal substance, and then, so you should get rid of their records. And I think that makes sense. You don't want to, if the marijuana is now all of a sudden legal, then you don't want to punish people with having a record for something that is now legal. Except that oftentimes people would have a marijuana conviction, but it would be tied to something else. So you would have a conviction for possession of marijuana or intent to sell, but then you would also have a assault charge tied up with that. And so the difficulty is, where do you draw the line on what gets expunged? Is it any marijuana arrest is gone? It doesn't matter, it's all gone? Or should you keep the expungement for people who have a marijuana arrest and an assault arrest? Do they still have a criminal record? And so that's not an easy answer. And so the legislature struggled with that. The other reason that legislature struggled mightily with it is that because marijuana and the illegal sale of marijuana had caused so many problems, particularly in Black and brown neighborhoods, and that the arrest of people for marijuana were not overwhelmingly, but were largely people of color. One of the arguments is that if you're going to all of a sudden make this legal, there should be an attempt to have the African-American community, the Latino community, people of color, people in underserved areas have a greater ability to get businesses and be able to have the ability to pay back to their community in some way, which is, again, another noble policy goal. But how you set those up in terms of the amount of set asides for a particular area or particular particular people is again a very sticky policy issue. And so they were arguing and going back and forth over that. So the reason marijuana was passed and then nothing happened is that it was easy for people in New Jersey to say, yes, we want marijuana to be legal, but it was difficult figuring out exactly what that means and exactly what to do going forward and going back. And the legislature has fought that out. I'm not sure they came up with the greatest solution, but they came up with a solution, and marijuana should be legal within the next should be available within the next 6 months to a year. So, Tanya, again.
My husband walked through the
Thank
kitchen while you were speaking, and he said, what happened in Prohibition when all of a sudden Prohibition, alcohol was allowed? What happened to the old convictions for that?
Nothing. They stayed. There was no expungement of records at all. There was no, that if you were busted as a bootlegger, you were still a bootlegger. I think that I think that there's a slight difference between alcohol prohibition and marijuana prohibition in that alcohol has been legal forever, and it was taking it away and making it illegal for a while, whereas marijuana has been illegal forever and now it is becoming legal. So it's a little bit of a different thing, but that's so if you know, the famous story is you know, John F. Kennedy's father was a bootlegger, and their fortune is built on bootlegging and illegal alcohol sales. And so part of their mystique is that's where their money came from. So they weren't about to get rid of their convictions. They were pretty excited about it, or they didn't care. So,
But
so that's a little bit of a
marijuana,
difference.
there's also the medicinal part.
Yes. So there is definitely medicinal benefits of marijuana. I think the research on that is pretty clear. What's interesting is that we did as a state move to allowing medical marijuana, and what's probably going to happen now is that all of the medical marijuana, now you're going to have shops where back in the corner there's going to be a little tiny medical marijuana place where you go and you give your prescription and you get a small bit of it right next to a place where you can buy anything you want. So there'll be the retail store where you can buy packets of marijuana. I'm exaggerating. And then there'll be the medical store where you just buy a little. And so how that works itself out could be kind of difficult as well. So,
But there are some dispensaries around in New Jersey that do the medical part of it.
there are. I'll give you an example. In my town of Highland Park, we got someone wanted to do a medical dispensary in our town, and we said, yes, please bring a medical dispensary. We would love to have a medical dispensary. And we went down the process. We did the zoning, we did all of this thing to do a medical dispensary. And then the law passed and they're like, yeah, we want to do adult use. We don't care about medical anymore. We want to just do adult use. We said, okay, you can do that too. But now we have to do another set of ideas and hurdles and things like that. But it's so there was a medical dispensary they were bidding for a dispensary. They wanted a dispensary, and then they gave up the dispensary because they realized that adult use was going to be more lucrative.
Yeah, there is one in Union I know of. So obviously
Okay.
it's proliferating.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
I actually played about 10 minutes after 1, and I don't know if you actually made a disclaimer about talking about Cuomo and his issues, his political fortunes or misfortunes at this point. And if you did, I'd like to get your perspective on what you think is going to happen with Cuomo and the difficult position that he's in, given the fact that he was a virtual rock star around COVID, but seems to be rather lecherous around his personal behavior with women.
So I did not make a disclosure. I will do my best to talk about Governor Cuomo, but I will do a small disclaimer. That's not where I spend a lot of time or effort. So I do think that when the Senator Schumer said it was time for him to go, and Senator Gillibrand said it was time for him to go, I think that was very significant. I think there were reasons why they decided to come out against the governor, mainly because if they didn't, both of them might have had a primary challenge from more progressive people. So, AOC is obviously the one that everybody talks about, taking on Chuck Schumer, and he didn't want at all to be seen in any way soft on the accusations of that have been leveled against the governor. That being said, he is not a shrinking violet in any stretch of the imagination. It will take a lot for him to listen and go away. I think he will fight as long as he possibly can. And he will. There's an investigation that is been put forth that I would think that he will stay through that and at least see how that turns out. I think that he is very convinced that that New York needs him, and as a result, he's not going to give up easily. So I don't know if I answered your particular question, but I do think that having both senators ask for his removal is a very, very tough thing for him to weather. So.
Well, can you just tell us about, so what about this? I just have to know about that.
So yes, I came up with this idea called "So What About This?" and I have to be honest, it's not as regular as it once was. What I try and do in "So What About This?" is throw out ideas that are different and new for fixing something in New Jersey. So we talked earlier about ranked choice voting. So I have a "What About This?" column about ranked choice voting. So what about this? And so the idea is, I don't know if this is a good idea, but it seems like a good idea. So let's talk about it. And that's really the impetus behind it. I don't write as many of those as much as I did a while back. I'm in the middle of writing a book, and that's taking a fair amount of my time. So if you do go to Insider NJ, you'll find them. But they're not as prevalent as they used to be. I still publish about once or twice a month, different op-eds over there. So the goal is to just raise different policy ideas that are different. So Abraham.
Wait,
Have you had any instances within the university of anti-Asian attitudes and actions?
Not to my knowledge. And I want to be clear about this, that I actually haven't I've been to campus once since March 13th, 2020. So, and most of our students haven't been there either. I know that Seton Hall does not have a large Asian population in comparison to other schools. I will say that that the faculty is actually voting as we speak to ask that there be a strong statement put out by the president condemning what happened in Atlanta. And I think that the president normally does that under these all too unfortunate incidents. So I expect that will be out soon. I know that tonight there is a Zoom vigil to discuss this. I don't have the details on that. It's probably on the Seton Hall website. You know, I do want to say just a short plug for Seton Hall in that respect. You know, for over 150 years, Seton Hall has been a great school for good Catholic kids to go. And I'm very proud of that history and that legacy. But I've watched the university as an institution grow and develop over time to be far more sensitive to diversities of opinions and diversity of people. And it truly is a welcoming place, I believe. And so I you know, I just think that it's important to recognize that this matters at Seton Hall. And I more broadly, one of the things about Seton Hall that I think is important is it's not just issues of race and issues of inequality, and it's issues of faith. Faith is important. It's obviously it's a Catholic institution, but faith is important and respected at Seton Hall, no matter what your faith is. And I do think that that's one of the things that Seton Hall does incredibly well is respect different faiths and have dialogues about different faiths. And so I think that's important. So.
Very nice.
Well, we have had Father Frizzell here several times, and
There you go.
I
Okay.
had Sister Rose Sperring here, may she rest in peace.
Wow.
And I could only vouch for Seton Hall as my grandson graduated there and loved it. And we're not Catholic. And so I just wanted to let you know that it does have an ecumenical attitude.
Yeah, I'm not Catholic either, but it is very a welcoming place to those of us who are not. So it's been good. So
It's a great school.
thank you.
And you were wonderful. And I don't know if you want to tell the name of your book, but will you come back when it's finished and you'll give us a talk here?
Well, I tell you what, I'll come back and talk about something else. My book is on the academic administration of nonprofit management programs, which is not something I think is really going to be of interest to this crowd. But I'd be happy to come and talk about some other things. So, but I think my book is probably not. This is probably not the best audience for that. So.
Well, I can't tell you how much we appreciated what you gave us today. And I do look forward to your talk next time on anything, because you're so fascinating and we did learn so much from you.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody coming. Thank you very much for the
Thank you.
opportunity.